Somewhere beneath your feet right now, something is waiting. It doesn't move, it doesn't breathe, it hasn't for over 65 million years. But it's still talking if you know how to listen. Every crack in a fossilized bone, every tooth mark, every layer of stone pressed around a skeleton, it's evidence, a crime scene frozen in time. And today, we're the detectives. This is the story of 8 extraordinary fossils, what they tell us about the animals that left them behind, and how scientists turn broken stone into a living, breathing history of our planet.
Let's start with the fossil every kid recognizes on sight. A skull built entirely around one purpose: killing. Look at the teeth. Not flat, not blunt, curved, serrated, spaced for tearing flesh rather than grinding plants. That single detail tells paleontologists more than almost any other feature on a dinosaur skeleton. This was an apex predator, an animal sitting at the very top of its food chain roughly 70 million years ago. Notice something else. The skull isn't sitting alone. Around it, you can see fragments of ribs, a limb bone, even part of a foot, all in roughly the position they'd have been in life. That's called articulation, and it's a big deal. When bones are found still connected or close to their original arrangement, it means the animal was buried quickly after death by a flash flood, a collapsing riverbank, a sudden storm, before scavengers or weather could scatter the remains. A jumbled pile of disconnected bones tells one story. A mostly articulated skeleton tells a very different one. A fast, violent burial that acted like nature's own time capsule.
Not every dinosaur was a monster. This next skeleton belongs to a much smaller animal, and its bones tell a completely different survival story. Look at the proportions. Long, slender hind limbs, a long tail stretching out for balance, short forearms. This isn't the anatomy of a predator built for brute force, it's the anatomy of a sprinter. An animal that survived not by being the strongest thing in the ecosystem, but by being the fastest to get away from it. This is one of the most underrated things fossils reveal. Body proportion is destiny. Paleontologists can estimate running speed, diet, and even social behavior just from the ratio of leg length to body size, or the shape of the hip socket. A tail like this one, held out stiff and straight, acts as a counterbalance, the same principle that lets a tightrope walker use a long pole to stay upright. Small dinosaurs like this one were everywhere. They just don't get the movie posters. And these feet? Built for grip and quick pivots, not for standing your ground, but for changing direction the instant danger appeared.
Now here's a fossil that didn't just describe an animal, it rewrote an entire chapter of evolutionary biology. Look closely at what surrounds the bones. Those faint, feathery outlines pressed into the stone aren't decoration. They're soft tissue impressions. Feathers fossilized in astonishing detail, radiating from the arms and tail of a skeleton that is unmistakably reptilian in structure. Clawed hands, a long bony tail, sharp teeth. This is the fossil equivalent of finding a fingerprint at a crime scene that matches 2 different suspects. Bird, reptile, both at once. This single slab of stone is one of...
So how does a skeleton go from buried for 100 million years to sitting in a museum? It starts long before anyone touches a bone. Paleontologists survey a region for exposed rock of the right age and the right type, usually sedimentary rock formed from layers of sand, silt or mud, because that's the only kind of rock that can preserve something as delicate as bone without destroying it under heat and pressure. Once a fragment is spotted eroding out of a hillside, often just a small piece of bone poking through the surface, the real work begins, and it is painfully slow, deliberately.
Bones this old are often more fragile than the rock around them, so excavation isn't digging, it's subtraction. Scientists use dental picks, soft brushes, and sometimes tools no more advanced than a wooden skewer, removing rock grain by grain around the fossil rather than lifting it straight out. Pull too hard and you don't recover a dinosaur, you recover dust. Every step gets documented. The exact position of each bone is mapped before it's moved, because position is data. A skeleton found curled with its neck thrown back, a pose called the death pose, can indicate the animal died in distress, its ligaments contracting as they dried out. A skeleton scattered and out of order might mean it was scavenged or moved by water long after death. Once fully exposed, the bones, and often the surrounding rock, are wrapped in plaster jackets, like a cast for a broken arm, and transported to a lab. That's where the real analysis begins.
Not every fossil comes from land. This one tells the story of an animal that never set foot on solid ground in its entire life. Notice the body shape, streamlined, elongated, a long tapering tail, a small pointed skull built to slice through water with minimal drag. This is a marine reptile, a group of animals that, while dinosaurs ruled the land, evolved completely independently to dominate the oceans. The preservation here is extraordinary. You can trace an almost complete vertebral column from skull to tail tip, curled slightly, embedded in fine-grained rock that once sat at the bottom of an ancient sea. That kind of completeness is rare, and it tells us this animal likely sank to a low-oxygen seafloor almost immediately after death. Again, that same no scavengers, no decomposition formula that gives us our best fossils. What's fascinating is that animals like this prove a rule that shows up again and again across the fossil record. Similar environments produce similar body shapes, even in completely unrelated animals, separated by tens of millions of years and living in different oceans entirely. Evolution keeps reaching for the same...
Here's a fossil that surprises people, because it looks prehistoric enough to be a dinosaur, but it isn't one. That downward curving tusk, that massive skull, this belongs to an ancient relative of today's elephants, a giant mammal that lived long after the dinosaurs were already gone. Unlike a modern elephant's tusks, which curve upward and outward, this animal's tusks curve downward, an anatomical detail so distinctive that scientists can identify the species from the tusk shape alone, without needing the rest of the skeleton. This is a good reminder that prehistoric doesn't just mean dinosaur. Long after the asteroid impact that ended the age of reptiles, an entirely new cast of giant animals rose to fill the empty ecological space, and their bones are found the exact same way, preserved by the exact same processes in the exact same layers of ancient sediment. The story of fossils isn't one chapter, it's the entire book of life on Earth.
Not every important fossil is a skeleton you could stand next to. Some of the most valuable evidence is almost microscopic. These tiny, honeycomb-textured impressions are the remains of ancient marine organisms, creatures that built colonial skeletons out of calcium carbonate layer by layer over their lifetimes. Individually, they're easy to miss, but in bulk, fossils like these are how scientists date the rock layers themselves. Different species existed during very specific windows of geological time, so when you find a particular tiny fossil in a rock layer, you're not just finding an ancient organism, you're finding a timestamp. It's how we know with real confidence whether the massive skeleton lying nearby is 70 million years old or 200 million years old.
Once a fossil leaves the field, it enters the slowest, quietest part of its journey, preparation. Here, fragments are sorted, cleaned, catalogued, sometimes CT scanned to look for internal structures invisible to the naked eye. Growth rings in the bone that can reveal an animal's age at death, healed injuries that hint at a violent life, even fossilized stomach contents that reveal a final meal. This is where a scattered collection of rock-covered fragments slowly becomes a story. How old this individual was, how it may have died, and how it fits into the broader picture of life on a planet that looked almost nothing like it does today. Every fossil in this video started the same way. An animal died, and by pure chance, the right sediment, the right burial speed, the right absence of scavengers, its body became a message instead of disappearing entirely.
We've looked at a predator's skull, a sprinter's skeleton, a feathered fossil that blurred the line between reptile and bird, a sea-dwelling hunter, a tusked giant, and fossils too small to see without getting close. Different animals, different eras, different oceans and continents, but every single one followed the same basic rule. Bones don't lie. They just wait, sometimes for 100 million years, for someone to ask the right questions. If you want more deep dives into what fossils can really tell us, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.